That's good, Bob.
Okay, great. So as I've used this different presentations, different styles, I thought we would start and understand the different hazardous materials a little bit more. So we talked and mentioned there are 9 hazard classes, and if you had a chance to look at your chart 16, if you look that up, this is what we're working off of. This gives you information about labels, about placards. So we'll go in here and look at this a little bit more closely in regard to the different hazard classes. So there are 10 hazard classes, and these are the particular warning labels that are used. So labels go on packages and placards go on vehicles. So as we look at class 1, we see that they are explosives, and we have 6 divisions with them, a 1.1 through a 1.6. 1.1 is the most hazardous, 1.6 is the least hazardous. So 1.6 would be kind of like fireworks, routine fireworks. I know in Florida, they have the opportunity, the state fire marshal's office has a container that they can go around and manage explosives. And it might not be as beneficial as it was before. Does anybody else have any way of managing explosives other than working with your contractor?
We have a partnership with a bomb squad also.
Okay, that's great. And Emily, refresh my memory on where you are. You're in
Larimer County.
Okay, all right. So that's a great partnership, and I will say partnerships are phenomenal. The better you have. If you haven't invited or had your fire department out and all 3 shifts of them, you need to do that and encourage them to understand and know what's there. I think I mentioned it yesterday that a lot of the fire departments have detectors and that they can identify material, and some of those detectors can see through glass, even dark colored glass, to identify the material that's in there. So reach out to your fire department, reach out to your emergency management agency to see if they have these devices. Invite them to come over when you've got some unknowns. Invite them to come over and look at those unknowns and help you identify them. So that establishes a great relationship. You can also have them work with chemicals that you have that you take in so that they can gain experience from doing that. So fire department, emergency management agency, codes enforcement, whomever is working with your group, health department. I just can't emphasize how much outreach there is out there to engage with these different ones, and generally they're looking for things. And this also gives us an opportunity to invite them to respective conferences that we have in your area or national conferences, and perhaps even get some presenters from them. So it's a great collaboration that we have, and I think that's part of the mentorship program that we look at and look for, not only within our organization and agency, but others that are out there. So one of the things, anybody else besides Emily, got anything with explosives?
No, we don't accept explosives within our HHW.
So with that thought, we don't accept them. What advice do you give? What options do people have? The challenge is if you don't take them straight up, you will probably take them, or your solid waste facility will probably take them in that black bag that comes in. So looking for, and that's the same thing with anything that people are trying to get rid of. How can you help them get rid of it? How can you help them find solutions for it? If you find a solution for one, then you've got a solution for many that's out there. So just a thought, as we talk about explosives, ammunition is stuff that pops up sometimes. We have people within the department that like to fool with ammunition, reloaders and stuff like that. Sometimes they will take it and reload it. I've got neighbors that are involved in reloading and reaching out to give them the opportunities. Look at and look for weapons selling stores. Check with them, see if they will, if they will take the explosive back and reuse them, disassemble them, and render them harmless. Again, because if we don't find it, we don't know where it will show up. So class 1 explosives. Remember, we pointed out colors are very important, and you see that class 1 materials, the orange color that's there. At the bottom are again the hazard class. So class 1, explosives do not show the respective divisions that are there, even though we have 1.1 to 1.6. If you are involved in shooting and with ammunition and stuff like that, small arms ammunition is a 1.4. So that's going to be 50 caliber and smaller that falls into 1.4 category. And actually, some of that material can be shipped without even having any labels or placarding on small quantities. So just be aware of that as we work through it. Class 2 are gases. And again, since we've got essentially an open mic time, if you have any questions, just shout out and we'll get those answers. So class 2 are gases, and this is compressed gases. And not gasoline. That sometimes confuses people when they talk about it. 1.1 are 2.1 are the flammable gases. Again, we see the red color indicates flammability. The United States has the printed name there, and then the class and division at the bottom. So what are some of the stuff you get at HHW that would fall into a flammable gas capacity?
Small propane tanks.
Okay, small propane tanks, large propane tanks, all propane tanks are going to be there. Anybody else have any other stuff that shows up?
We would get old gasoline.
Okay, now does gasoline fall into the class 2 as a compressed gas?
No.
No. Okay,
So it's butane.
Okay, butane, propane, butane, and Janet, we'll talk about old gasoline in class 3. So just hold that thought as we get there. So propane, butane,
Oxygen tanks.
Oxygen tanks actually are compressed gas. So what's a solution with an oxygen tank?
We send them to a different, we give advice on where to take them other than our program.
Okay, all right, so you can give advice where you can take them back. You open the valve, let the oxygen out, and you've got an empty tank. You can use it for scrap metal. You can use it for donating back to other organizations. And what I have seen a lot is that a lot of times people have these oxygen tanks and the company has gone out of business. So just open the valve, and when it's empty, it's empty. There are no hazards remaining to that. So don't be scared of it. Respect it, but don't be scared of it. We had a neighbor of mine in the county had some oxygen tanks a few years ago, and they were probably 6 or 8 inches long. She had 2 of them in the back of her car. Kids were playing with them. They had taken them from the floorboard and put them up in the back of behind the back seat. It was pretty hot. So the pressure increased. It caused the pressure release valve to pop off, and it shot the oxygen tanks out the back window, at least one of them. So handling that as, again, the relationship you have with the fire department, emergency management agency, and other responders, we're seeing more and more oxygen tanks that are being used in homes. And some of the stuff that happens when people, they're oxygen tanks and they're oxygen generators. The generator plugs up or operates on battery, extracts the oxygen out of the air and concentrates it for people to use. And of course, the tank have that in that. They will drag, or they will have a long enough plastic line, breathing line, that they will pull through the house so they don't have to carry the tank around with them all the time. Over a period of time, these oxygen lines will abrade on the floor or where they're dragging across, and it will rub a hole in them. So that allows the oxygen to escape into the room, and people, despite what they are told, they will still smoke while they're on oxygen. And so you've got a super oxygenated area or a super oxygenated house, and that causes problems. Also, when they are using the cannula that goes into the nose or the mask on the face to use that when they're laying down, obviously that oxygen is going to escape and super oxygenate the pillows, the couch, the bedding material that they're in. And if there's a spark somewhere else in the house, it will cause a tremendous, much more rapid fire and much greater heat that's there. So just be aware of that as you're, again, interfacing. I know a lot of you and a lot of our organizations are involved in rural fire departments, volunteer fire departments, and things like that. So be aware.
So then if we're venting oxygen tanks, should we use like a non-sparking drill?
Well, I would recommend just open the valve and let it out. Once it's out, then there's no remaining oxygen that's going to be there, and it wouldn't, you know, you could just take the valve out if your metal recycler, you know, doesn't have to have a hole in it.
Okay.
So you take the valve out, you've got an open container or an empty container. So propane, butane, some of the other gases that are out there, MAP gas, all that kind of stuff, looking at and looking for, you know, ways to get rid of it. The propane cylinders, the 1 pound propane cylinders, you know, they have a center valve where you put the device into it, and then there's a side valve that's used as a pressure release device. You can remove those, and they're essentially Schrader valves like there are in a tire. Remove those valves. When it's empty, there will still be an odor there because the odor that's added to the propane is mercaptan. It will penetrate and permeate the metal. You will smell the odor of gas, but the gas will not be there. It will have escaped when you open the valve and take care of it. A great way is in your advertising, in your website or on your social media. Give some advice to people that are using the cylinders. Advise them to burn it till the flame goes out. And then after the flame goes out, then essentially it will be empty, and you could, you know, depending on where you are, you can discard it in your trash or your metal recycler. What the city of Portland, Portland Metro does out in Oregon, Washington, they have an arrangement with their metal recycler. When the container is empty, they will put a drywall screw in a drywall insert rather into that center valve. That will keep the valve open, and it will be released. So the metal recycler sees that, and then what you can do is, you know it's empty, and they will take it off and use it for scrap recycling. So Don has asked about the PDF for this. If you will do a search on DOT chart 16 on Google, it will pop up. Same thing I've got. So you can see, if you can see up here at the top of my my URL, Don, that's got there. That's
okay. Got it, Bob. Thanks.
Where you can go to. So good stuff. So class 2.2 are non-flammable gases. So Courtney, I see you downloaded from the App Store. You can get that online, but there's also this PDF version that's under DOT. And I think I mentioned yesterday that the emergency response guidebook is available at no charge from DOT. All right, so Miss Kelly has put some stuff up there for us. So she's just getting more points. 2.2, as we said, is a non-flammable gas. So non-flammable gas, yay, you too. Non-flammable gas are things that can be problems. If you will remember, and not only tie this DOT as DOT itself, but build it like we talked yesterday on the EPA and the OSHA side. So let's look at or think about the OSHA side, health and safety, your HAZWOPER and HAZWOPER refresher information, some of the non-flammable gases, and we'll start off with fire extinguishers. As we talk about that and share some other commonalities about fire extinguishers. Fire extinguishers are a non-flammable gas. They are generally charged with nitrogen. Nitrogen is the propellant source, so they are a compressed gas, but it's non-flammable. So even safety items can be a hazardous material. The powder that's in fire extinguishers generally is monosodium sulfate, which is a fertilizer. So essentially you can take the the powder out of the fire extinguishers and put it in a garden or work it in with a compost operation that maybe you have. Some of the other non-flammable gases that we have are could be oxygen, even though we have a separate item for oxygen. Oxygen will not burn, but it supports combustion. So that's why it makes stuff burn faster, as we explained a while ago with the super oxygenated bedding material and stuff for home health people. So carbon dioxide. Anybody know what carbon dioxide is used a lot for?
Welding.
Dry ice.
Okay, dry ice. A couple of you were on top of yourself. What is
It's not compressed gas, but dry ice.
Yeah, okay. So what does McDonald's use carbon dioxide for?
Soda machines.
Soda machines. So it's been a few years ago now. There was a elderly lady in a McDonald's in Georgia that died while there. When I first heard about it, I thought it might have been a cleaning product that they had used in there and she was exposed to. It turned out that it was carbon dioxide. She was sitting on the commode, lower down. The carbon dioxide line from the tank outside passed through the bathroom into the soda machines. It leaked in the bathroom and it displaced the oxygen. So, carbon dioxide is heavier than air. It went down lower where she was. Essentially, she suffocated to death because of not having oxygen. In addition to her demise, there were several firefighters that had to be taken to the hospital because they were not aware, they were not thinking about the carbon dioxide displacing air. So think about around your facilities where you have carbon dioxide. Other carbon dioxide uses, paintball guns. You may get containers, cylinders in that have carbon dioxide in them that are used for paintball guns. Some of the soda machines the home soda things, all of these types of things are materials that can come through your HHW and be there. So carbon dioxide, argon. Argon is used in welding. Jumping back to the flammable liquids real quick, acetylene is something that you might see that shows up in the facilities as well. So 2.1 is flammable gas, 2.2 is non-flammable gas, and notice again the color, the symbols, and the wording that's on there that you're using through that operation. Anybody think of any other unique gases?
Helium.
Helium, exactly. So what's a helium discarding source?
Balloon tanks.
Okay. Remove the tank or let the tank empty out. I'm looking for a little valve here. So many of you've probably seen those tanks come in, they'll still have this little inflator on them. If you will take the inflator off, it unscrews, take the inflator off and then open the valve and let the helium escape, then again, you've got an empty cylinder. So you could punch a hole in it. If you look on the cylinder, there will kind of be a small area, depressed area. That's a softer metal that you could take a punch and punch that hole in if your metal recycler wants to do there. But it's very important that you remove this inflator because it still serves as a valve. If you open the valve to let it out, this will stop it from coming out. So just remove that inflator that's there, and it will escape. So you've got used metal. No need in having to send that off and having it disposed of. One of the things that the NAMA policy committee has been working on is information related to aerosols and compressed gas cylinders. So we should make that material available pretty soon. We're pretty much on our last draft of it. So we talk about oxygen tanks, we talk about helium tanks, we talk about propane, other things in that. So maybe give you some solutions to look at. And again, information you share with your customers that are out there and how they can manage that. So solutions. Yes.
What about like anesthetic gases, nitrous oxide, halothane, something that might be found in a surgery center, dental center, hospital?
I would probably refer that back to a gas company, Don. And you probably, I'm just trying to think of things where you might see that. Perhaps a clinic or something closes down and has residual and somebody's cleaning it out. I know from your standpoint, you're involved in inspecting and looking at those things, but they should have a pretty close relationship with their gas vendor or with their compressed gas vendor, and that's where I'd recommend that.
Okay, good answer.
All right, was that a trick question?
No, not an easy one though.
Okay, well, it's easy for NAMA folks. So and with that thought, share. You know, we've got 5 of you folks on here from almost 5 different states and different activities that are out there. Share what you've got and grab information from other people. That's again the advantage of the NAMA national meetings, the webinars that we have, and that's probably something that we can do. And if you have subjects that you think would be beneficial for webinar material to share with other people across the NAMA world, let me know, or let you can reach out to the NAMA webinar folks, and they will be glad to do that. We're always looking for different subject matter. Okay, anything else about gases, compressed gases rather? All right, well, let's move to Janet, and I'm not trying to embarrass you, Janet, whatsoever. So old gasoline, stuff that comes in. Do y'all remember from yesterday what we gave as a definition for a flammable liquid? We talked about DOT flammable, we talked about EPA ignitable, and we talked about OSHA flammable. Do you remember what the DOT definition was?
Flash point less than 140 Fahrenheit.
All right. Prize winner. I know all the rest of you were just sitting back waiting. You didn't want to be too forward. All right, so flash point less than 140. And just for y'all's information, gasoline has a flash point of minus 45 degrees below zero. So it certainly falls into that category. Now, as you are looking at different materials, different flammable materials, what are some other flammable liquids that maybe come into your facility?
Diesel, kerosene.
Okay. And again, for reference, we kind of talked about them yesterday. A flash point below 110, certainly below 140, or excuse me, a flash point about 100 to 110. So it will be below 140. It would fall in that category. What else? What are some of the other flammable liquids that maybe you bulk together?
Alcohol.
Alcohol, exactly. So with this pandemic going on, and we talk about alcohol, what alcohols might you see coming in from that standpoint?
On hand sanitizers.
Exactly, hand sanitizers, and generally they are ethyl alcohol. They are the kind that goes into gasoline, the ethyl alcohol that goes into that. There were some methyl alcohols that were made into hand sanitizers, so just be aware of that. We talked about and mentioned fire marshals. I know that the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, and some of the codes enforcement, they have quantity limitations on the quantity of hand sanitizer / alcohol that can be stored in protected areas, and protected areas are those protected by fire sprinkler systems. Quantity that can be there on different floors, protected and non-protected. So if you work with your schools, be aware of that, be aware of and look at the expiration dates that might be on there and have that information.
So would the quantity limitations be different for methyl and ethyl alcohols then?
I don't think they would, Emily. I think they're probably going to be about the same. But
Okay.
and I think that the quantity limitations would just it would reference a flash point and a boiling point. And that would be information that you could find on the safety data sheet. So they have OSHA / NFPA / fire marshals. They make reference to category 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, things like that. So that's where you have to look a little bit closer to find that information. But for your purposes, the flash points are going to be okay. If anybody wants a chart that has that information, if you'll send me an email, I can send you a copy of that chart that was made available to me by the Tennessee Fire Marshals. So flash points, what other things? Diesel fuel, gasoline, kerosene, alcohols. What else?
OBPs,
I didn't quite catch that, Janet.
OBPs, oil-based paints.
I'm sorry, you cut out on me just a little bit.
Oil-based paints.
Oh, okay. Yes. Oil-based paint. I'm not that much of an acronym guy. I'm old school, so you got to have to tell me the whole thing. and with that thought, be sure that you're telling your customers the whole thing. As I mentioned yesterday, we get involved and get engaged and get managed from the standpoint of being able to look at what they understand. So at least the first time, spell it out, and then if you want to add abbreviations and acronyms, that's great. So oil-based paint, yes. What else?
Many of the parts washer solvent or thinners, so acetone, xylene, mineral spirits, MEK, lacquer thinner.
That's where I was headed towards. So all that kind of stuff. So back to Janet's comment about oil-based paint. If you look on the contents of what's in that oil-based paint, all those thinners and solvents that are there are generally going to be flammable material. So concentrating and pouring that material up. Remember, as you're consolidating this material, if you have not done an assessment of the fumes and vapors and stuff, be sure that you do that as part of your safety aspect that you're working with. Now, the hazmat police are not going to come after you, or your contractor or vendor is not going to come after you if you happen to pour a non-flammable material into that container. If you realize it, catch it, that's okay. But working toward that flammable liquid that we've got. So anything less than 140, if you get things above 140 a little bit, if it doesn't affect that, don't, the world's not going to stop turning. Along with that, as we think about that, I want to mention the word profile. I don't know how many of you have dealt with or deal with your profiles, but as you deal with your vendors, they will have a profile for each waste stream that you have. And I would certainly encourage you that you have copies of all the different waste stream profiles that you are sending out. Essentially, and many of you may have signed those profiles, or your people above you have signed those profiles. So know where they are. That will tell you the material, generally the material that can be accepted into those particular waste profiles. It will tell you what types of containers they can go in, what kind of containers your vendor will accept. So with the 5 of you that are on here, and I know that Don, I know that y'all pack your own stuff. Does everybody pack their own stuff, or do you have contractors that comes and pack the stuff? Let's run down with Emily. How about y'all?
We pack our own.
Okay, and then Courtney?
We pack our own.
Okay, and Janet?
It's a little bit of both. We'll pack our own, and then also the contractor will assist with that.
Okay, all right. And Justin?
The businesses I help out are a mix.
Okay, all right. So, and Justin, you're kind of like Don in that you're inspecting businesses, a small quantity. Do you do any large quantity stuff?
Yeah, all small quantity generators.
Okay, all right. So that's the thing. Again, having copies of those profiles, that is essentially a safety data sheet for the waste stream. So as you had those profiles and look at it, and Don and Justin, that might be something y'all, as you're inspecting your businesses, if they have a routine waste stream, ask them to see that profile and see what's, you know, what's acceptable and what goes out. That might help you in addition to looking at your raw product stream first, and then see what they can put in that as well. So go ahead.
Is there a standard like format for profiles, or is it just going to differ vendor to vendor?
It's probably going to differ vendor to vendor in the final details, Emily, but it will be, it's generally going to have the same kind of information on there. It's going to have, you know, what's acceptable in this waste stream. It might have pH ranges if it's a corrosive material. If you've done a T-clip on it, maybe what those T-clip results were. And again, that would be more for business waste that you were looking at. And it essentially, you as a generator or somebody in your group is going to be signing that, certifying that, and the profiles are generally certified every year.
Then I have another question that about lab packs. Like I know, I guess a lab pack isn't going to have a profile, but there's a lot of different definitions for lab pack, like in DOT, and then like what we call a lab pack audit for facility is like different from DOT definition. So
Yeah,
I don't know. Can you speak to that a little bit?
the generally how the vendor is set up. Do you mind sharing what vendor you use?
We use 2 different vendors, but we send most of our lab packs with Veolia.
Okay. And there's not much difference in them. You know, I would touch base with them and be sure where you want it to go. There are not many disposal outlets. There are several disposal companies, but there are not many ultimate disposal outlets. So I think incinerators, with one of the larger companies, vendors that are out there, they use incinerators a lot. 2 or 3 others may have them, but nothing like it was a few years ago. And some of them might have a pH range on what they want in their lab packs, or if they want to separate it separately. And I was trying to think of some companies, depending on what they are, what they want to have put in there. Again, you know, some of them, they will repack that stuff and put it in larger quantities, or perhaps bulk it together and then ultimately go to a treatment facility. I don't know if that helped or touch base on it or not. I
think so. It has more to do with like the ultimate destination for the waste than like that's why we have lab packs, is because they don't fit into a standard profile and they have to go through extra steps.
Right. And sometimes there's not enough volume of the material to go into that. So Don shared with me that he finds a lot of outdated profiles at auto body shops for their thinners and spray booth filters and things like that. What kind of reaction do you normally give them, Don? Do you tell them that they need to update that and that is really out of compliance if it's not current?
Well, they often have heavy metals in them, which used to be in a lot of the paints, 10, 20 years ago. Very few current auto body shops really are spraying with metal pigments in their paints. But what I can say is, if indeed you have metals in your paints, then every bit of masking paper or rag that gets that overspray on it, in addition to the booth filters, is hazardous waste. And I can say, I can look in your dumpster right now. Here's some masking paper. If that paint has heavy metals in it, you've just improperly disposed of hazardous waste. And so I say, you really need to update your profile to determine if the paints you're currently using do have those heavy metals in them.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and Justin, you might piggyback on that as well. The generator is responsible for waste determinations, and if they haven't signed a profile sheet every year, they have failed to make that waste determination, just like you mentioned, Don. So it puts them in a non-compliance. You know, you don't know what's in their stuff. They are the only ones. So they can use generator knowledge, or they can use testing to make that determination. So I would say, you know, if they hadn't updated the profile, maybe a notice of violation for not identifying waste is an opportunity that might bring them back into compliance. Okay, so we've jumped around and talked about several different things as we've got to flammable liquids. The first two, class 1 and class 2 materials, you see they have primary hazards and not primary hazards, but hazard classes and divisions. Class 3 material does not have any divisions with it. I might mention that we are focusing on DOT, Department of Transportation. Inspectors are out there and looking at it. And generally, this is going to be good for the United States and 200 miles out to port. There are other, I mentioned dangerous goods and toxic industrial chemicals, toxic industrial materials, all that kind of stuff. If you start shipping stuff by vessel, there are regulations and guidance that are referred to as IMDG. International Maritime Dangerous Goods. So IMDG goes and are regulated beyond the 200-mile limit of the port. So if stuff goes out, and there is a separate document that is used for the IMDG, International Maritime Dangerous Good Regulation, for shipping stuff. So if you are at an area where ports are and you are servicing other areas, you want to be aware of that. I talked about training yesterday. How long or how frequently do you have to have DOT training for ground transport?
Ground,
Every
3 years,
Okay, 3 years, good. Air?
2.
2 years. Okay, so that includes anybody and everything, essentially for both of them, that are having to do anything with the safety. So if they're completing paperwork, you bought labels, you bought placards, you bought drums to be sure that they meet the standards that are out there. As I think about flammable liquids, and we talk about bulking them before I move on, DOT will make reference to closure instructions. So every box that you use, every drum, every container that is a specification container, and we'll talk about these specifications more, needs to have closure instructions. So if you have a drum, the closure instructions would tell you the torque that the bungs had to be tightened to. And how would you know what torque you were achieving?
Torque wrench.
Torque wrench, exactly. So I have never heard of an HSW facility being inspected to see the torque wrench or the contractor to see the torque wrench. I do know that I have a friend that worked at a tire manufacturing plant, and it was in Alabama. They had an inspection, and the inspector wanted to see the torque wrench. So the two partner pieces are the closure instruction and any equipment to make it happen. If you've got boxes that you are sealing up, that box was tested with a certain type of and specification of tape. In order to meet and maintain those closure instructions in compliance, you would have to use the same type of tape that was tested, that the box was tested with, or the packaging was tested. So torque wrenches for bungs, torque wrenches for bolts if you have an open head drum that's out there to meet those specifications. So that would be something you'd want to at least have in your facility, are those closure instructions, and whomever you get those packages from would be the ones that provide you that information. If you are using reused, reconditioned drums, again, you want to get the closure instruction from that reconditioning company. If you get drums back that it looks like they have not been, you see where they maybe tore off the labels, they tore off the shipping labels and scraps and stuff like that, I would scrutinize them very closely. because those containers generally would not have been reconditioned appropriately. So you want to be sure that that is, granted, you might not sign the manifest, but they can come in and look at and look for how you're using it.
So Bob,
Yes.
so specifically for like a 55-gallon drum that might be used for bulking at HEC3 or HHW, those closure instructions would come from the manufacturer of that drum?
Yes, initially they would come from.
Okay.
So if you were getting them directly from the manufacturer, then, you know, they would provide them to you. And some facilities get them through their contractor. So if you're getting the packages through your contractor, then ask your contractor for the closure instructions.
And is there typically like a torque range?
Yes, and I have not seen a lot of them, but for instance, a bolt, open head drum that has a bolt ring around it, it's about 35 pounds is what the torque is. So you can see in that, and I guess they give a variance, maybe 32 to 38 or something.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Would be there.
I have a question. We use some cubic yard boxes, and printed on each box it says, when using for lab pack waste, reference CFR 49-173.12, maximum gross weight is 452 pounds. Does that ring a bell to you? Because I've looked that up several times and I'm confused about what that means.
So 452 pounds is a maximum quantity that cubic yard box is designed to hold.
Okay.
And that's when it was tested. It was tested, and it would be able to pass, if you will, the 4 or 5 different tests. It's every box is not tested or every container is not tested, but they will test a certain quantity in each manufacturing lot in order to meet that. So and Emily, I'm glad you mentioned that. If y'all are shipping out batteries, you need to look at the maximum quantities of batteries that can go into a container. It's not how much you can get in the box or in the drum or in the package, but how much it's tested for. And when we look at the packaging specifications, we will look at that UN spec. We will see that UN spec, and it will have that on there as well. Okay. All right. So if I am throwing too much stuff out there, I don't want to do you like I did yesterday and overwhelm you. So if there's something that doesn't pop out there at you, please stop me and let me know. But I think I should have started with this yesterday, and so we'll do that in future stuff. So class 4 material are flammable solids. We have spontaneously combustible. A flammable solid itself, spontaneously combustible, and then dangerous when wet. Now, can you think of anything that would fall in any of those 3 classes or divisions that you get at HHWs?
We just got aluminum phosphide yesterday.
Okay. And it fell into?
Well, dangerous when wet.
Okay. All right. Very good. What are some other things that we might find in there?
Road flares, we get those in.
Okay. All right. How do y'all manage those, Courtney?
With those, I'm not sure because I'm not usually the one that packs those. I'm only down there 1 day a week. And so our manager usually takes care of those. Sometimes
you can convert some of these materials into a different hazard class. If you look at explosives, if you break up explosive or put them in water and soak them in water, then you've converted from an explosive to a flammable solid.
Okay.
So that gives you a little more flexibility, and sometimes those road flares can be managed in a similar type process, so that water can soak through them and not and reduce the hazard that are there, certainly with safety requirements. So Emily, with the dangerous when wet, can you tell me anything else about dangerous when wet in addition to the blue placard that we see? or blue label that we see.
About how it needs to be packed or shipped?
Yes.
I don't think I can.
Okay, that's very good. I appreciate your honesty. So dangerous when wet is a category, and we'll talk more about placarding, and y'all wanted to know about placarding, but any quantity less than nothing of a dangerous when wet requires that the transport vehicle be placarded with dangerous when wet. So 1 pound, half pound, quarter pound, anything that's got a dangerous when wet on it is going to require that transport vehicle to display the dangerous when wet. Generally, we go up to 1,000. We talk about 1,000 pounds before it starts to trigger stuff, but that's where that goes, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Some of the some of the sodium azides. Sodium azide used to be used in airbags that are there. Now a lot of the airbags are oxidizers, and we'll talk about them in just a minute. But the other different stuff you might see from schools, and again, schools that have been around a long time that have not cleaned out their storage area will have had donated stuff to them. So Don, is school something that you inspect, or how are they handled?
Absolutely, we inspect schools, and I have come across some legacy chemicals a few times. Our state DEP went through the schools maybe 10, 12 years ago doing chemical cleanouts. But then in that 10 or 12 year interim, they've begun to accumulate again. And I've seen the sodium metals once or twice. Another thing on the sodium azide, it's not in schools, but it's also sometimes used in the plumbing industry. And there's a special little warning document about your piping under the sink sometimes spontaneously blowing up due to sodium azide accumulation.
Yeah, I know several years ago we had some issues with that, and some picric acids that were poured down the drain, and you know, reenactors, you might see sodium azide there used as part of the propellant system for firing cannons and stuff like that. So it could show up from an HHW, from somebody that had it in their household because that was their hobby. Again, issues that are out there. So that's what I think about, in addition to those items that we've listed. Sometimes your preppers will have calcium carbide. Calcium carbide is another dangerous when wet chemical. When it is wetted, it off gases acetylene gas. So
Can you talk about sodium azide for a second? What hazard class would that be?
It's going to be a 4.3.
Okay.
Yep. And we will look at the table stuff here a little bit as well, if you've got any stuff that you know. So class 4 materials, charcoal can actually fall into a class 4 material. Can be spontaneous, rags, things like that. So you want to be careful to manage and not that you start collecting rags and things, but looking at things that are there. We talked about fish meal yesterday, kind of a unique situation that's out there. Class 5 are oxidizers.
Hey, Bob,
Yes.
Can I jump back to class 4 for a minute?
Sure.
So 1 or 2 inspections of like outdated emergency supplies at the long-term care facilities. I've seen cans and cans of Sterno that are expired or unwanted. And I know that's it's kind of a jelly. I wouldn't call it a liquid. I'm not sure I'd call it a solid. Would something like outdated Sterno or waste Sterno fall into a number 4?
Yes, or possibly a number 3. So let's talk about how you would tell the difference. Let's talk about DOT liquids. We said yesterday that if you have a DOT liquid or any liquid material, the container is going to be shipped as a liquid. You could put liquid and solids together, but if it has any liquid at all, it's there. So DOT has a test called the paint filter test. And it is a paint filter like you would get at a paint store. And I don't remember what the time frames are, but if you pour sterno, for instance, into that paint filter test, and if no liquid comes out, then it's considered a solid. If there's any liquid that comes out, then it would be considered a liquid. Now, I have seen a lot of times sterno over a period of time, if it is set around, it will separate out. You generally have that jelly form, but then you might have some liquid that comes out in that. So if you have it, and if you have a liquid to it, and you can pour it into or bulk it and consolidate it into your flammable liquid, then that would be an option that's out there.
And is a flammable solid defined by a flash point or something like that as well?
It is, and that would be where you need to go back and look into that section where DOT gives those definitions. And I apologize, I don't remember that part and subpart where that was, but that's a good comment, Don, and against the liquids and solids. So the paint filter test is another test that's out there. And that probably would be more used by a generator, small quantity, large quantity generator that we're doing that. So, and sometimes there's certain advantages and disadvantages for bulking and consolidating and shipping materials out, the pricing that's there. Okay, good stuff. So let's move to class 5. And if it seems like I jump back and forth, I do, because my brain does that. And that's the way DOT, EPA, and OSHA stuff is. You kind of go down one rabbit trail and get in there, and it sends you down another one. So we have to be rigidly flexible as we go through this different stuff. So class 5 are oxidizers. And let's talk for a second about a fire. What 3 things does it take for a fire to happen?
Fuel, oxygen, and ignition source.
All right, good stuff. Now, if we talk about oxidizers, what does an oxidizer provide in relationship to a fire?
Oxygen.
Okay, provides oxygen as well as something that will burn, the fuel that's there. So we generally think about oxidizers, and there are oxidizer strips that you can get and test stuff with to see if it is an oxidizer or not. Then I mentioned yesterday we talked about chlorine and chlorine byproducts and items like that, and those items that kill bacteria. I talked about the pool chemicals that are organic and inorganic type stuff. Now, y'all have probably figured out, and I will say, going back to your thing, Don, about inspecting schools, I know that Dave Nightingale, or Waddell rather, came through and did a lot of stuff with Rosemary Rosemary Botcher across the school system and counties in Florida, looking through that. And what I have seen for those of you that work with schools is that a lot of the teachers we have in Tennessee are not educated as a chemist necessarily. And a lot of times they will change every 2 or 3 years in some situations as they move out and move through school. So I think this is what happens a lot of times, as Don mentioned, chemicals are starting to show back up, legacy chemicals that were there. They do because they don't know how to get rid of them. And there's not a good system in place to take care of that. So looking at and looking for those chemicals that are there. So oxidizers, again, Yeah, I knew Dave Waddell had been active in that. Invariably, and Dave Waddell is a good friend of ours that was very active in NAMA and establishing it. He did a lot of school clean out. Invariably, every school he would go to, he would have to call the bomb squad in order to get rid of some of the stuff. I don't know if he brought it with him and he planted it there, but anyway, to keep up his legacy. But anyway, a great guy that's out there. So as we talk about stuff that shows up, a quick thing that I had at an event a few years ago. Unlike Dave, I have not had to call the bomb squad except one time. We had an event. The guy brought some stuff with him. His buddy was kind of an alchemist and was trying to figure out how to make gold. And
Okay, perfect. Appreciate it. Thank you.
so the guy, the chemist died. His friend was helping clean out the house, had a lot of chemicals he brought to an event. His greatest concern was the mercury that he had found. And that's okay. You know, we talk about mercury and the hazards a lot. So he dropped off several items and had gone on about his way. The contractor was going through the stuff and said, we can't get rid of this. It turned out to be trinitrotoluene, which is TNT. So there was about a 4 ounce bottle of that. It wasn't that full. So that was my first interaction with the bomb squad. I called them, they came, and it was because of a relationship that I had met them. I talked to them. I had the guy that was in charge on speed dial, and we didn't have to go through all this rigmarole about what was going on and what was happening. He was able to immediately, have a response, even though it was about 2 hours later. Those are the things you have to take care of. Did Emily or Courtney, y'all have a question? I saw your. Okay. So let me, before I jump ahead and talk more about oxidizers, we were talking about liquids and solids. Mercury, what would you say mercury is? A liquid or a solid?
It's generally called a liquid metal.
Okay, it's called a liquid metal, but according to DOT, it is a solid because it will not go through the paint filter. So that's
interesting.
Yeah. That's again knowing what the advantages of knowing the devil's in the details, if you will, through this kind of stuff. So oxidizers provides that oxygen. There are solid ox pellets that you can buy at Home Depot, Lowe's, things like that. They're used for, and I saw some come through an HHW event recently. So looking for the labels that are on the container. Organic peroxides. That's what you make rocket fuel out of. Benzoyl peroxide is an organic peroxide that's there. It is often used as a hardener in a Part A, Part B epoxy or Bondo. So I don't know if your contractor requires any specific separation of those material that you work with. So benzoyl peroxide is also used in zit screen, but not enough hazards. We talk about the the oxidizer that's used in your bathroom. It's only a 3% concentration, so it could actually be consolidated and bulked up with some of the other materials that you're working with. All right, let's go to Class 6 just a minute. So we talked about. Go ahead.
3% hydrogen peroxide. You would bulk it up with flammable liquids?
You can bulk it with flammable liquids or your non-haz stuff. Yep.
Okay.
Cleaners and detergents. Yep. Okay. So we talked about Class 6, poisons versus toxic And I don't know why they've got toxic in parentheses, I guess, to be sure that people understand that. And this is DOT stuff, as we talked about. So working through that, liquids and solid toxics that we have. Can't think of anything unusual. Those are things that can go pretty quickly as far as segregation and sorting. I don't know if y'all have seen a lot of Roundup that's starting to show up at the HHW events. You know, since they've got all the legal beagles on TV and talking about the cases of Roundup and cancer and stuff like that. You know, from us here in the farming country, that was such a great thing years ago to be able to kill weeds and not people, but kill weeds and not impact the soybeans and corn and stuff like that that was being grown. Class 7 is radioactive. We talked about the smoke detectors, generally what we see. You can manage those, send them off, spend big money, or double check and see if it's acceptable, if your landfill can accept them. One other thing that I might mention about radioactive material that I have gotten phone calls about, and some of you in the solid waste department may get phone calls about, is cats that are treated and given radiation treatments. You know, and I had one lady that called and said her vet told her to do this and do that, and she was just raising the alarms as I talked with our rad health folks. You know, it's just a matter of a little bit more time for the half-life of that stuff to go away. So sometimes trash haulers going across the scale at landfill, they'll have Ludlam meters that will detect radiation sources. They will pop hot. Oftentimes maybe it's a bandage that has been taken off too quickly by somebody. Oftentimes it could be a driver that has been treated as well and has not removed the bandage or still has it on there. Generally, they will let it sit for a little bit or let somebody else drive it across the scales and see if the meter goes off. If it does, then it's some stuff that's probably in the package. If it did not, then it was perhaps the driver that was doing that.
Yeah, we get that from time to time here. We have radiation detector at the scale house, and so the driver who's had some recent treatment sometimes sets it off. Another waste stream that sometimes has some radioactive component to it is exit signs. There's a small percentage, 1 or 2% out there that are based on radioactives, similar to a smoke detector.
Yep. I think they had some of those were tritium from in the past, and tritium is a glow in the dark type thing. So you don't have to have a light source. You know, as a kid, I remember I had a watch that glowed in the dark, and the alarm clock glowed in the dark. Sometimes you might see some Fiesta ware, some of the old highly bright colored Fiesta ware dishes that came out of Mexico that would show a radioactive source. And then the mantles that were used in some of the old Coleman lanterns, they would have a radiation source as well. So just things to be aware of. We have had have had people, in fact, bring an X-ray machine through an HHW event. But all this stuff, again, relationships. Where's your rad health people? Do you have somebody in your department or at the county level, state level that you can reach out to and again be a resource, and they can be a resource for you as well.
Some of the really old X-ray machines can have some PCBs in there, and some of the units.
So while we're talking about it and using X-rays, have any of you seen an X-ray machine that has that X-rays particular parts of the body years ago that kids were excited about? I might be working with too young a crowd here.
I've I haven't experienced it myself, but I believe they were involved in shoe sales to properly
Yes.
fit your feet.
Yes, exactly.
Little
So-
boxes you'd stick your feet into. Probably not much shielding either.
Exactly. And you stick them in there, and one of those shows that rehab stuff, they showed, rehabbing one. They had a really strong X-ray yield on them. So mom could look and see how much growth space there was before the kids' toes would grow out of the way. So that was one of the things that are out there. All right. Any questions so far? All right. Well, let's talk about corrosives. So how do we normally, or what's one way that we determine what a corrosive is?
pH.
Exactly. pH strips are your friend. If you don't have pH strips at your facility, you need to get you some, because and I get on the soapbox a little bit about corrosives, because I don't know why they don't have an acid corrosive and a base corrosive as far as with the labels and placards they use. So if we look in our pH scale, we know goes from 0 to 14. Anything less than 7 is going to be acidic. And acids just have one name. Anything greater than 7 are going to be caustic. They are going to be alkaline, or they can also be caustic and alkaline. Well, help me out, Don, somebody. Basic.
Yeah.
Basic, caustic, and alkaline. So didn't mean to make such challenges afternoon for you, but anyway. So we know that acids and bases do not get along very well. Again, pH strips are your friend. Generally, we look at DOT, and that's what we're focusing on. DOT says a corrosive is a material that causes visible necrosis or destruction to the skin of a white albino rabbit in 3 minutes or less. So, when you get to be a hazmat geek, those are the kind of things you spit out there, Don. You have conversations with your friends around the table about Jeopardy, if you will. DOT Jeopardy. So I'm going to pick on Justin here just a minute as far as working with generators. What does EPA, what's their definition of corrosive?
Let's see. I think it's 2.5 on the low end. Then on the high end, I believe it's 12.
So you need to relocate your 0.5.
12.5 and 2?
Yes, correct. Less than or equal to 2 or greater than or equal to 12.5. That's what EPA says.
Or
and
the quarter inch of metal a year?
Yeah. And that's a D002 characteristic waste code definition. It says it has to be have an aqueous substance. So you can't, if it's not liquid or doesn't have a water phase to it, you're not going to be able to test that. That's why it's a little bit confusing sometimes for hazardous waste people if you're dealing with a corrosive solid. If it's a solid material, it doesn't have an aqueous phase. You can pH it, and just a minute, let's run the gamut here about from an HHW what you might do. So if you have solid material, and I said pH strips are your friend, a bottle of water is also your friend as far as wetting a small amount of that and then putting a pH strip on it to determine if it's an acid or a base. So that can help you do that. But just again, the differences and the definitions between OSHA, DOT, and EPA that are out there. So generally, and those of you that are consolidating non-haz, Emily, what general pH range do y'all use when you're looking at your non-haz stuff?
Probably like 4 to 10-ish.
Okay. All right. And that's generally for those of you that have not been around that much, anything, cleaners and detergents that are out there, like I say, greater than 4 and up to 10 are not going to give you any reaction problems that are there. One of the other, and Portland Metro, again, use them as a reference. They solidify their stuff. If it's non-haz and solid, they are putting that material into their solid waste stream. They're not handling it as a hazardous material or waste or anything like that. One thing, jumping back to the fire extinguishers, we said is monosodium phosphate. That powder could be, as I said, could be used as fertilizer. It could go on your toxic solids. It is very powderous. It is very dusty, but it's ground very finely, and generally silicone is added to it to make it come out of the fire extinguishers. But it is not necessarily, it's an obnoxious item, but is not a hazardous material. Your nitrogen, you off-gas it. There are several companies you can buy, people that have modified drums, put a sock-like material and spray it into a drum, take the valve out, empty it out, recycle the valve, recycle the metal for beneficial reuse. You do not need to pay $100 for somebody to discharge a fire extinguisher or dispose of fire extinguishers. And some of the contractors will do that. They'll gladly take your money. Okay, so class 8 corrosive acids, bases. We see a lot of times people fail to read labels, and and sometimes the male gender is even less favorable to reading labels. But as we look at acids and bases, acids certainly will burn you. They will burn your skin. They are more easily washed off than the bases. Bases, your detergents, generally all your cleaners and detergents, majority of them are on the basic end, the high pH material, and they will eat the fat. And that's the reason they dissolve the fat when cleaning, allow it to be washed away in the universal solvent water, and be taking care of that. Now you can't see below my belt, but I've got several good meals for some corrosive materials cleaners here to take care of. Sometimes, and lye, red devil lye or Drano is a high pH material, and again, because that does work on the fat cells and dissolve them. Somebody has a stopped up drain. They go buy Drano, they're familiar with that, and they pour it in the sink. It sits there and it fizzes and spits and buzzles, but it still doesn't empty the drain, doesn't clean itself out. So the significant other in the household will say, are you going to clean this drain out, or am I going to have to call a plumber? And seeing dollar signs, you say, okay, I'll take care of it. So back to the big box store you go past the Drano, because you've already seen that and tried that. You go down and you see another container, hot drain cleaner, and you grab that and said, well, I haven't used that before, but let's try that. Guaranteed results. You grab it and go back to the house, and again, male gender, fail to read, fail to understand, and I think fail to understand a lot of times. You don't understand, or people in general don't understand what we're talking about when you talk about putting in, mix it with basic material. So you pour it down, you've already got alkaline material, basic material, caustic material that's in the drain. You're pouring a low pH onto a high pH. It is going to react, and it very possibly will blow the sink off, or blow a hole out in the pipe. And I have seen this occur where in schools even, I think you understand that. So you have poured an acid, you have poured hydrochloric acid down into that base. So just be careful and cautious. Another challenge we see at HHWs are containers that have an acid and base together. You know, they are in separate items when they're in a bottle, but when you pour it out, they mix together. And I don't know if any of you've had any dealings or challenges with those or not. But just to be aware of what's going on. All right, so we are at class 9. We refer to this as miscellaneous hazards, and that's going to be essentially everything that's not covered before. And again, those definitions, as we talked about, are very important. We mentioned yesterday, and we talked about batteries, and I will kind of go back and show both of these. We talked about the dangerous when wet. Lithium is a dangerous when wet chemical as well. Now, we're seeing a lot of lithium batteries. Generally, the batteries are not going to be have enough lithium in there for them to fall in the dangerous when wet material. But they will be a class 9. So as you look down at the bottom of the class 9, that label that's at the very bottom, you see the shapes of batteries that are there. That is, they have modified and haven't included in this printing. But if you order items that do have lithium battery sources in it, they will have that. I don't know if any of you read the NAMA news that came out yesterday, and there was something in there about items that don't need batteries. I don't know if I did not read the whole article, but I was intrigued by it and do plan to go back and look at it. So excited about that. We are, with electric vehicles coming out, we are having a tremendous amount of lithium battery plants that are being produced across the United States. Tesla generally makes theirs in Nevada. They've got some plants in California as well. And their process is to send those damaged, defective vehicle batteries back to the manufacturer. We have a plant in the Clarksville vicinity, which is just 20 miles away from here in Tennessee, that are building a plant to manufacture lithium batteries for over-the-road trucks, big trucks that are out there. So, there's a big concern. Some of you may have seen the situation a few months ago where a Tesla car caught fire. It took them over 40,000 gallons of water in order to put that out. And you say, well, if lithium is dangerous when wet, why do you use water? That essentially is the only thing that's available in order to kind of smother it out and cool it down from that standpoint. I talked to a lithium battery safety guy out of Texas. We got to chatting about the lithium batteries, and he said that, of course, the batteries are underneath the vehicle. They are very well encased and protected, but if something breaks that case, and then over time water will get into that, then you can have a reaction, a chemical runaway reaction for those lithium batteries and cause problems. I was picking up a rental car a few weeks ago, and a guy talking about undercarriages. A guy had run over an armadillo that had broken some fluid lines under the rental car that he had and caused problems. So armadillos are tough. You got to watch out what you run over. So, any questions about the 10 different hazard classes that we've talked about so far? All right.
Hey, Bob, I have a quick question.
All right, go ahead, Don, and then Janet.
I'll defer to Janet first.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan. I have a question about the fluorescent light bulbs. We have several of those. Can you tell me what class that would be? Would that fall under the miscellaneous class?
They can go 2 or 3 different ways, Janet. If you are recycling them, they are universal waste, or they are universal waste overall. So if they're being recycled, you can, if you want to put more protection on them, on a class 9 hazard as well. And if you will kind of hold that thought, when we come back here in a few minutes, we're going to go into the hazmat table, and we're going to look at that, and we'll look at some different options that we have in the table to do that.
Great,
Now,
thank you.
with that thought, let's talk about regular fluorescent bulbs and the green tip bulbs. Green tip bulbs do have mercury in them, and we in Tennessee manage them as mercury containing bulbs. Some states tend to consider that the level of mercury is below the hazardous waste standards, below the T-clip standards. But in order to be sure, you would need to conduct a T-clip on them to make sure that they're out there. And Don has pointed out that the universal waste, there are labeling standards, labeling requirements, which, as he pointed out well, different states have different requirements. So look for, generally when the universal waste came out from EPA, they wanted you to put them in a sturdy container, and it's not a UN specification container, but just a sturdy container. They are only open when you're adding to or taking out, and the container should be labeled with the contents. So you could call them used bulbs, fluorescent bulbs, several different options that are out there. Was there any other requirements, Don, that you can think of?
A closed, labeled, structurally sound container. Here in Florida, you've only got technically, you've only got a 1-year accumulation time limit. And we have very specific verbiage, although there's like 5 different things, but used lamps is not one of them.
Okay. So I'm glad you mentioned time frame. Accumulation start date has to be put on there. So when you put that first bulb in that box, you label that's your start date, and then that gives you up to that year that Don mentioned to get rid of. If it is a large quantity handler, then their time frame is less that are out there for the time frames. Okay.
And again, I would suggest you check your own state regulations regarding universal waste, because I know Florida's is specific to us.
Yeah, and that's the way we mentioned yesterday for virtually all the stuff that we've talked about, is to be sure that your state. Okay, now your time, Don.
Oh, I was just going to ask about what other examples might fall under miscellaneous?
Vehicles that are being transported, new vehicles being transported, fall into class 9.
Wow.
Engines that are being transported, some of your T-clip stuff, environmentally hazardous substance liquid, environmentally hazardous substance solid. If it just is above the T-clip level and does not meet the full definition of a hazardous material, that would be some other stuff. Sand, soil, contamination, cleanup sites, a lot of times fall into that category. And we'll just scan down through the table and look at it a little bit. So I'm showing about 12:25. So I'm going to give you about for Central Time. So it's 25 after the hour, whatever your hour time is. So we'll come back in 15 minutes. So 40 minutes after the hour. Is that right?
Works for me.
All right, 40 minutes after the hour. Okay, friends, I think we are back for our time. This is going down to the last hurrah. I decided to go ahead and stay on this DOT chart 16, where we are. And I want to take you to the placarding tables that we have. That's on there. If you've got your own copy or just looking at this. So as you notice under the placarding tables, we have table 1 and table 2. And let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Maybe. There we are. That we have. So table 1, as you look down at the hazard classes that are acceptable or listed on here, what do you see? Do you see any that we spent a little bit of the time talking about?
Yeah, for the organic peroxides.
Okay, and that's one of them. Anything else? Anybody else?
Dangerous when wet.
Okay, that's kind of what I'm focusing on, Justin, as we want to be sure to do that. So any material, any quantity of material of a table 1 material requires placarding. So 4.3, the dangerous when wet, is out there. So as we've gone through this, and I guess DOT kind of complicates it and makes it a little bit challenging, overwhelming, if you will, sometimes. So that's why it's important to be able to know what those different hazard classes are, and classes and divisions that we work on. So the dangerous when wet is there. So any quantity of a dangerous when wet.
What's
generally,
the reference for this table in the CFR?
it is 172.504 E. Yep. Now, looking at table 2, generally we are going to have table 2 materials. We don't start worrying about it or being concerned about placarding until we get to 1,001 pounds. So 1,001 pounds is the magic number that we generally make reference to. Now, most all of you, some of you said you were a mixture of packing it yourself and contractor packing it, or individual. So when the stuff leaves, it's going to be a contractor that's hauling it out. The burden, the requirement is that you make the placards available, but contractors will use, have pre-positioned placards that are already on there, and they just flip them to the right one. How do we know how much? So what document do we look at to make that 1,000 pounds determination?
The manifest?
Exactly, the manifest or the shipping paper. So we will initially, I would say you'd go down there and look first and see if you see any dangerous when wet, then you know that. And then beyond that, when I was on the road hauling chemicals, I would always placard everything I had, even if it were less than 1,000 pounds. I would calculate it and display those placards. What you might think about doing is take a picture of the placards that your contractor is leaving the site with and place that with the manifest. That way, if there's any question about what the placards that were on there, then you know that, hey, I've got a picture of it. We've got it saved. We can look back. Some drivers sometimes go through areas, and there are certain areas that will restrict or limit placarded hazardous material placarded loads from going through tunnels and through cities and things like that. Sometimes truck drivers will be dishonest and change the placards to go through. That is on them. But if you've got a picture of what it looked like when you left, then you can confirm what's going on with that.
I have a question about, we have VSQGs that bring waste to our facility. So like if they had aluminum phosphide or whatever, are they required to placard their vehicle? It's like their car or something.
If it is well, truly it would be, you know, if they were meeting the letter of the law, they would.
Yeah, I guess we just advise that they use our like state's technical assistance line, and we rarely see any of them placard because I just don't think they know.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just too complicated. I don't know.
I would try to defer them, you know, defer the responsibility to them or to the state, you know, technical assistance that you had.
But wouldn't most VSQGs, they wouldn't be self-transporting 1,000 pounds of anything, at least not in Florida.
Well, I think she's talking about dangerous when wet, which
Like
requires
table one.
any quantity of material to be placarded.
Okay.
Let me make a note of that,
Mm-hmm.
Emily, and it is Emily, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and I will research that.
Thank you.
That's a really good question, Emily. Thanks for asking that. I'm going to research it too.
Well, if you do it before I do, Don, tell me what it was.
Okay.
All right. So I generally, again, when I would fly the placards, I would fly the individual placards according to their own. Now there is the option that, and if we go back up here and look at the placards a little bit. You see that they're similar to what the labels were, but a little bit of an option. And you see the dangerous placard that's over here. If you have a quantity less than 200 kilograms of a table of more than one table 2 items, it gives you the option of flying the dangerous placards. I would recommend that you go ahead and use the individual placards. So if you had if you had 1,000 pounds of flammable, or 1,500 pounds of flammable, and 1,500 or 1,000 pounds of corrosive, you would not be able to use the dangerous placard. But say you've got 900 flammable, 900 corrosive, you could use the dangerous placard. When you exceeded the 2,200 pounds individual flammable and or corrosive, then you will be required to switch to that individual placard that's out there. So while we are looking at it and talking about tables, if you've got that chart, if you look, I'm going to talk about identification numbers. So we had talked about that a little bit as far as being like it shows a 1090 here along with a flammable, or you see the 1090 on the placard with a number. So the identification number indicates that it is a bulk package on that container. So it could be cubic yard boxes, 1263 for paint. It could be tote tanks, capacity greater than 119 gallons for liquid tanks, and have the identification number on that. So if you see a van trailer going down the road and you see placards with multiple identification numbers, then you know there are bulk packagings on that container.
What is between like 55 gallons and 119 gallons? What's that called?
It
just
would
non-bulk. Okay.
Yeah, it would be a non-bulk. Yeah, it does not meet that bulk capacity till it exceeds 119 gallons. I saw part of your message, Don. Let's see here. Nicotine waste, pure and unused, is acute hazardous waste. Nicotine is not a table 1 and requires over 1,000 pounds. Yes, that is true. So if it's a table 2 material, then we look at the 1,000 pound capacity before it's required to start placarding. So what?
I just thought it was interesting that it's so highly regulated as a waste, but it's not as highly regulated in its good product form in terms of placarding.
Yeah, as a hazardous material, yeah, it's DOT is not as concerned about it as EPA is from that standpoint. Is most of that large quantity in 55-gallon drums, I would guess?
Actually, my query to DOT was about vape stores, and we've got a manufacturer with a chain of stores. And so I wanted to know the requirements of them transporting their product to their outlet stores, if there were any like DOT requirements for that. And the answer shocked me a little bit in that not unless they're transporting 1,000 pounds.
Okay. Yeah. And another, and they probably looked at it, but double check the reportable quantity table, the RQ table, the
Okay.
appendix to H8, the appendix to the hazmat table, and see if nicotine shows up in that or not.
And then the only difference, if it does, is the only difference that it's going to be listed as a reportable quantity on the manifest, or are there other requirements?
Yes, yeah, it's listed as a reportable quantity, which essentially gets, draws attention to the fact in the event that there's a spill.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at that RQ table, Don, it would be one to see if it was listed on there, and then see what the quantity is, reportable quantity is.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. All right, so is everybody good on the identification number, what that means and when you have to put it? And it goes back to the manifest and or the other shipping documents that you have to confirm that. How many places on a vehicle do we put placards?
I want to say 3.
Okay. Another guess? Call a friend. So let's think about it this way. How many sides of a vehicle are visible to different people?
4.
4. Okay.
Add 4 from above, aerial, helicopter.
Well, I'm not going to deploy my drone or my helicopter. So we're going to say from the ground surface. Good thought. 5 if you were a snake crawling under the truck. To see that?
Yeah.
So, but 4 is the correct answer. Front, back, both sides. And whatever is displayed on one has to be displayed on the other. So be sure that they're doing that. I can't think of anybody. My 5 intellectual students that I've got. Any question that you have? We want to be sure that you're comfortable with placarding.
I'm curious about that definition of bulk and non-bulk and how they arrived at that.
I have to plead ignorance, which I don't have to plead very hard, very long, but it would go back to the preamble. If we went back to the preamble of the CFR when they were making these regulations, it would talk about it. I don't know if that was a packaging standard, if that's what they felt like there was a greater concern for, but it would, that's where we would ultimately find that. So I'll kind of make a little note here for
I mean, 55 gallons is such a standard container volume. I'm trying to think of what widespread container might have that volume and therefore that kind of seemingly odd threshold.
Yeah, why they didn't choose 55, why they chose 119.
Yeah.
And very possibly, like I said, we can find it in the preamble. It could have been connected to the dangerous good regulations that had already been established in Europe. They were a little bit ahead of us on some of this stuff, so there could have been some European containers that met that category, and I would say probably somebody lobbied for it to be at 119 so that they wouldn't have to jump through hoops for quantities less than 119. They could use labels and not have to go to the expense of placards on smaller materials than that. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions? We feel pretty good about the placarding discussion. Hopefully, and
I have a question. I don't know if it has to do with the placarding so much. We have a drop-off HHW program where people bring their small quantities to us.
right.
We currently have no limit on what they can bring, although we have a non-commercial clause, which is gray area on, someone can bring us 300 gallons of paint they've accumulated over 20 years. And, it looks commercial, but it is in fact not. My concern with the no limit requirement is that, not that we are encouraging, but someone could bring us 100 pounds of oxidizer in their car. And what if any are there regulations concerning private citizens transporting large amounts of chemicals?
A lot of places. And before I jump into that, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize your name. I saw the number yesterday, but not sure who.
Oh, John Washington.
Okay, John. All right. I didn't have you as being with us, but we're glad to have. And so where are you located?
Denton, Texas.
Okay. All right. Yep. I've been to Denton a while. How long have you been working at the facility?
I've only been here about 7 months.
Okay. All right. Well, is it Mr. Garcia that's over that?
Yes, sir.
Give him my regards, please.
I will.
And all the other folks that have been there a while. We've crossed the river many times with each other. Okay. So generally, now that I've got got enough stuff that I can hack you up. No, I'm sorry. Generally, we talk about 150 pounds. And I don't know that I have ever seen where DOT starts regulating stuff from a household to a commercial operation. If I or you were to go to a paint store and buy new paint, then that would be, how many pounds or gallons I would have to have before I had to start having a shipping paper for manifest and put me in there. There's a terminology that we use that DOT has talked about that makes reference to materials of trade, and they abbreviate that MOT sometimes. Some of those material of trade guidelines give commercial vendors a little bit of flexibility in order to manage stuff, so that they don't have to have shipping papers. For instance, if they've got wasp spray or something like that, individual containers that are on their vehicle and then they're moving up and down the highway, or some of the other routine things. But I will dig into that a little bit more, John,
I appreciate that.
And all of these questions that these individuals ask, I'll be sure and send it out to the group as well. And as y'all share, that. Okay. Now, did somebody else have another question?
I am curious if, I guess my question is just about like, if you have any general advice on reading the CFR, but maybe that's something that is better for a different time.
Well, and what I would, I have a guy that operates an HHW, and he said he has read the 49 CFR twice. You know, it does not make any sense necessarily when you start from first to back, but I would recommend reading it and relating it to the different sections that you go to so that it makes sense. And that's kind of where we're going to go next, and kind of look at the hazmat table a little bit and kind of follow through with that to see where it goes. And we'll kind of hold that thought, and we'll see how that takes us to other areas. Any other questions on placarding? All right, if not, let's look at the hazardous materials table. We kind of went through this yesterday a little bit. And some of the questions that y'all have asked, I'll just try to remember to them. So Don, I think you talked about what kind of stuff is class 9. So if we look in the label code, if we look at column 3, that would give us a primary hazard. As we look at column 3, we go down, we see acetaldehyde ammonia. It's a class 9 material. The looking on down through some of the other stuff, but the it's here we are with airbag inflators or airbag modules, seat belt pretensioners, that falls into class 9. And I mentioned that has ammonia nitrate in them a lot, and that has been one of the issues that has been the concern. When that ammonia nitrate gets wet, it tends to adjust or change their reactivity and how quick or how fast they deploy. So that's a concern from that standpoint. We had we have a processing plant in Upper East Tennessee. They process bulbs, fluorescent bulbs, as well as airbag inflators, and they had been processing airbag inflators. This has been 3 years ago. It was, as they has processed these, it had become very dusty in the area, and the dust, and it was aluminum dust that had come off of those airbag inflators. There was a source of ignition in there that ignited that aluminum dust and caused an explosion, and it was unfortunately a fatality of one person and a significant injury of another person. So working through things like that makes a challenge for us. So let's look at, since we're on this page and we'll look at aerosols, let's talk about aerosols for just a minute. And I'm assuming that most people will put all your aerosols in a Gaylord box, cubic yard box, and use that. So flammable material, as we look at the aerosols flammable, that's going to cover flammable other items. We do not have an option for aerosols that are flammable and poisonous. We've got aerosol poison, aerosol non-flammable, flammable. So we are going to pick a aerosol flammable as the option, and I think you will all recognize that if you've looked at the shipping papers, it's going to be a 2.1, which is the compressed gas. It'll have 1950 on it. And the quantities of aerosols are there. I mentioned that NAMA, we have put some stuff together for aerosols. We didn't make it happen this year for a presentation on aerosols at the National, but plan on that for next year. We have a processing facility in West Tennessee that will recover aerosols. and then be able to send the container to scrap. There are some aerosols that are in plastic containers now, and Febreze is one of them that I've seen, but generally we see aerosols in metals. So if we were going to make a shipping description of the four major components that we have, I ship. So we start off with the identification number, and so we've got UN 1950, S, proper shipping name, aerosols, flammable, hazard class is 2.1, and the packing group. So what options packing group do we have?
Just 3? Oh, well, 1, 2, or 3.
Okay, well, and are on the same page. Actually, there is no packing group for aerosols because it is a compressed gas. That was one of the things we chatted about yesterday as far as the area. So only on aerosols, we're going to have the identification number, the shipping name, the hazard class, and then that's it. For the
I have a
aerosol.
question. Are we
Okay.
using there's like aerosols corrosive, then aerosols with flammable and italics, and then aerosols flammable NOS, but we're using the shipping name aerosols flammable in italics and not aerosols flammable
No.
NOS?
NOS, yeah.
We are
We're
using
going
NOS?
to use, yeah. Yep.
Okay. And then do we have to put in a description behind the NOS as well?
We do. We
Okay.
have to have at least 2 constituents that are included. So they have included engine starting fluid. So
Okay.
So anytime, even though, and I'm surprised that they didn't put a G as a generic shipping name there, but anytime we have an NOS, we want to have one or at least one and possibly 2 of the constituents that's there. So we're saying that this is aerosol flammable. It's not otherwise specified, but we need to give emergency responders some information about what they are using and what could be included in here. Now, can aerosols be a problem? Yes. It's been several years ago, but we had a truck coming through Nashville, and I don't know if the brakes overheated or whatever, but it caught fire and it was hauling aerosols. And it was shooting aerosol containers through and out of the container at the emergency responders, and kind of, increased the pucker factor for them quite a bit. following through with that. So, okay.
And
ahead.
sorry, I have more questions.
No, sorry.
So there's aerosols with flammable and italics, and aerosols non-flammable italics, aerosols poison in italics. Do we put those words in italics on our shipping names? I thought.
Yes. Well, the Roman type is required, and then the other, but yes, it would be part of the shipping name.
Okay, but the each not exceeding 1 liter is not going to be.
Not required. So we're good?
Hey, Bob, if HHWs are bulking aerosols, aren't you going to have a mix of these types?
You will, yes. And that's why you generally, and you mean bulking by put them in a cubic yard box, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and that's why you would use the aerosols flammable NOS as the proper shipping name. In
Colorado, it's a universal waste.
And I think we're seeing that more and more since they've added aerosols to the universal waste arena, giving the larger quantity, small and large quantity generators a little more flexibility that are there. One of the things that with this aerosol presentation that we'll have hopefully next year, and Missouri has used this as a clarifier, if it is for household waste, if it's empty and no hiss, then they want it to go to recycle metal, because it's empty. So once it's empty, no hiss, meets atmospheric pressure, then go into the recycled metal container.
Meets the what pressure?
It meets the normal atmospheric pressure.
Oh, got it.
It's not a pressurized container any longer. So some of the stuff that you might think about doing as far as for aerosols is encourage people to save the tops, save the buttons. You know, sometimes we get aerosols that won't function any longer, you know, and we still feel like we have in there. Encourage them and give them guidance on saving those buttons from other aerosols and replacing them, and see if they can continue to use that aerosol container, you know, as far as best management practice, instead of throwing away containers that still have contents in them. You know, we see some facilities that have the puncturers, you know, that puncture them and deplete the contents, gas and pressure. That, you know, that's very time consuming in some situations, depending on how much you're receiving. You know, additional catching the fluids and contents that are there, and what materials you might use. If you just do paints, or if you just do flammables, do you do pesticides? You know, that's kind of my concern. Some will not excuse me, will not use pesticides because of the hazards of the pesticides being there. Okay, we're good on aerosols. So we talked about airbag inflators. Let's look at something else. So again, back to the question that was raised about how do you read the 49 CFR? Like we say, I would start out at a perhaps a practical level, like looking at the hazardous materials table, understanding that, read the section that talks about the proper shipping name and how those are come about. Then as you go across, looking at the hazard class. And as you're reading and looking at this and trying to figure out, so I've got alcoholic beverages. So generally, they are a 3, but if we go over to the right where we have quantity limitations, we will look at and see column 9A. And let's see what alcoholic beverages. So if it's less than 5 liters per packaging, then it's not regulated as a hazardous material, or it's under less restrictions. And I might say that we were talking about what could be bulked and consolidated. Alcoholic beverages fall in that category with flammable liquids. Here in Tennessee, we have quart jars that come in sometime with a very clear liquid in them, and you know, and as you laugh, in the early 70s, we had a neighbor across the field from our farm. My dad was milking, and there was a fire. The barn was burning. The still exploded. It killed one and burned another one really bad. So white lightning and moonshine are still prevalent in our Tennessee area. So we look at alcohols, all flammable materials that are there. If moving on down, somebody give me another shipping name of some of the products that you ship out.
Do paint related material.
Okay, let's go down to look at that and talk about it just a minute. And actually, I think I'm going to make a stop before I get down to that. But
So I have open like an copy of the CFR2, and I was looking up the special provisions for aerosols, which are listed as 153 and N82, and I can't find 153. Does that mean it doesn't exist, or
possibly so?
Okay.
Just make a note of that, and as we get toward the end of the table, we'll look at it.
Okay.
So I'm trying to get to the F section. And we'll kind of talk as we go down through that. So we mentioned that there are 3,000 to 3,500 proper shipping names, and we said there are millions of chemicals that are out there that don't meet that definition. So we go by family names. Second, we go by generic names, as we said. So here I am at flammable liquids NOS. So we see that it is a generic shipping name. It has a G in column 1, and the NOS is going to tell us that we need to add the constituents. So as we look at the flammable liquids NOS, we've got options, as we mentioned, flammable liquids NOS 1, 2, or 3. They are all going to be class 3 materials, and the UN 1993. Generally, we are going to be looking at hazard or packing group 2. So again, just to look at the special provisions, there are none that are the numbers by themselves. They are all codes. The intermediate bulk tanks, the tankers, the tanker trailers. So we don't have to worry about any types of the containers that are there. And again, generally, we're going to look at other options. So if we have some material that are flammable liquid toxic, again, hazard class 3, and when we get ready to ship that, what labels are we going to put on there? We're going to put 2 labels on there. So which ones?
Flammable liquids.
Okay, there's one. And what's the other one?
Poison.
Okay, flammable liquid and toxic, 3 and 6.1. Now remember, if you stop at column 3, you just see that that it has the 3 there, but we have to go over to column 6 to double check that, to be sure to show not only what labels we put on there, but we have to make the hazard class of 3, 6.1 as part of our proper shipping descriptions. So we would have UN 1992, flammable liquid toxic NOS. Since it's a generic and NOS, we're gonna put parentheses in there. We're gonna write 2 chemicals in there. The next item is going to be 3, 6.1 as the hazard class. And as I said, generally we go with a class 2 packing group. So these are the things that you want to look at with your contractor when they're picking that up. And as you look at that and you ask your supervisor, if you have questions about it, and ask your supervisor and you're not sure, feel free to reach out to me. Like I said yesterday, I am a tool in your toolbox to help you or some of the other NAMA folks that are out there. All right, so we were going to paint and paint related material. And within the hazardous waste world, you're going to have, basically just probably 8 or 10 of the proper shipping names that you're going to be using. So you don't have to worry about, if you make a job aid, print something and laminate it, have it available where you can look at it and double check and be sure you're talking about the same thing. That's certainly an option that's out there. Okay, paint related material. Here we are in the middle. So paint related material, this includes paint thinners, drying, removing, or reducing compounds. So it's not just the paint itself, it can include other thinners that go in. And I think we don't do that a lot of time. I think we're missing the boat on being able to get rid of some of those other materials when we do that. Certainly be sure that your contractor is acceptable in working with that. So hazard class is 3. While we're looking at 3 and think about hazard class, let's look at column 6. It's 3 as well. UN 1263, and that's generally what we talk about. And then the packing group, 1, 2, or 3. Generally, we go with a 2 or a 3 that's out there.
So we get a bunch of reducers that have isocyanates in them sometimes, but we just put them in toxic anyway instead of paint related material.
Okay. So this paint related material is going to be, anything that's flammable. Can you put non-flammable? Sure, but it's more convenient to you to certainly pull out the latex. And I know my Austin friend are doing that and separating that stuff out and reusing it. So that's some beneficial use to it. And plus, it's less expensive to take care of that. So let's look at.
Hey, Bob.
Yes, Janet.
Sorry, I have a quick question on that latex paint. So we do come across some of that latex paint. Is it beneficial for us just to dry that out, leave it out and dry it out, and then dispose of it just in the trash once it's completely dry? Or do you recommend, shipping that with the hazardous waste?
I am about saving money. If your state agency allows you to dry it and throw it in the trash, I would recommend that if you don't have a paint care or some other reuse program. So different options that you have for drying it, as you said, to open it and leave it out, let it dry. That's one. You could add kitty litter to it. You could add sand, soil, shavings, anything that's going to be absorbing that material. What I also recommend is to possibly use cement, dry cement as a drying agent. Stir it, mix it. That's going to put it out. We say that there are no hazards to latex paint except you can't put liquids in the landfill. So that's kind of our motivation to do and take care of that. Other options are to take plastic or cardboard and spread it out. Pour it on that plastic or cardboard. That increases the surface area, which allows it to dry quicker, and then you can throw it away. We have scared people about trash. We have scared people to throw things away, and they see a paint can, they think it's hazardous. And emphasizing, and on your social media, what paint cans, especially if they are empty, they are empty. They can go in the trash. Empty and dried go in the trash. Any other containers, and we had the discussion yesterday about RCRA empty and DOT empty. Containers that are empty need to go in the trash. They don't need to bring you empty Roundup containers for you to, unless you're recycling that plastic. But if they've been used and rinsed, and unless some of your states have a different protocol on that. But I think people hold on to empties thinking, again, we scared them. We think they got to hold on to it just for HHW stuff.
Great,
Anybody?
thank
you. Yeah. Anybody have any different contrast? One of the things, Janet, you might look at, our Rutherford County, Tennessee has a video called "Stop the Splat," and they have shown. It's on YouTube, and they've shown several different ways about drying paint out. You're welcome to look at that. If you don't already have something, if you have issues with a lot of latex paint showing up, I would encourage you to go out there and let people know how they can get rid of it. The challenge we see oftentimes, paint comes in 5-gallon buckets. The contractor leaves what's left there. We've got some chronologically mature people, also lazy people. They don't want to dry it out, and they want somebody else to take care of it and do it. So, just being able to work work that system through there. If your people have got remodeling projects going on, and if they're taking carpet out, and if you don't recycle the carpet, pour the paint on the carpet and let it absorb through there and dry up, and get the liquid out of it. There are also some polyacrylamides, agents that you can put in there and that will solidify and dry that up. The same stuff that's in baby diapers or in pet diapers and things like that. That's a polyacrylamide type material. And you could take, if you got a small quantity, you take 2 or 3 or a package of baby diapers or dog puppy pads and pour the material out on that, let it soak up, and then discard it, So several different options.
Mesa County in Colorado uses it as an alternative daily cover for their landfill.
Okay, and
Yes.
and who else besides?
At Yakima, we also do
Okay.
that.
Okay, all right. And if, and I guess you're doing that, you're pouring it into a tote and then taking the tote out there and spraying it on there as a cement binder type thing.
Yes, at our landfill, we have a large spray machine where it holds 1,000 gallons of liquid, and then we mix in with bentonite clay and spray it over the garbage at night.
All right, so once again, good stuff to share across different areas, taking these ideas and taking them to your boss that's out there and looking at, cost, what's the cost of beneficial, what's the cost of the bentonite and other things that you've got in there, and what does it save you, how much airspace and how much time does it save you versus rolling out a tarp or having to do daily cover on it from that standpoint. So great ideas. So as we are looking at the hazmat table, once again, reading the 49 CFR, I would again look at that. And as you look at the top, again, the top of the columns, the sections that are there to read and understand and follow through with that. As I said, the beginning of the before the table, there's all the information that we talked about that explains what each column information has and makes reference to you. Does anybody else want to, any other proper shipping names that you got that you want to research and look at a little bit?
Can we look at metal hydrides, water reactive NOS?
Okay.
Mostly, well, I don't know if we need to look at it, but my question is just like, how do I know what qualifies as a metal hydride NOS?
So as I think about metal hydrides NOS, it would be a combination of metal hydrides. If you just had one can of calcium carbonate rather, if you just had one can of sodium, and probably seeing how your contractor wants them to be placed. If they can go together, then that's fine, and you could use that because you've got calcium chloride and lithium or sodium or magnesium or something like that that are all in there together. Then that would be when you've got multiple quantities of stuff, that's when you go to a generic or a family type name.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, if we don't have anybody else on that, let's look at, see if we can
Hey,
kind of
Bob.
move. Yes.
I asked a quick question in the chat about,
Oh, I'm sorry.
does it allow for synonyms?
If it would pretty much depend on what what it says.
I mean,
go ahead.
Early on as an inspector, I got fooled by MEK is the same as butanone. So I was reading safety data sheet, saw butanone, didn't think much of it till I figured out that that was actually same thing as MEK.
So let's look, you know, nothing like looking and seeing where we are for that. So since we're close to, let's see if we can find MEK. And for those that anybody not know what MEK is,
That methyl ethyl ketone.
it is, yes.
Fairly common organic solvent. You can buy it in 5-gallon cans at a big box store.
So this is kind of throwing me off on the chloride. Somebody help me which way I need to go. Methyl butane.
No, I don't see it in there.
So look up ethyl methyl ketone.
Okay.
Thus the synonym. I've never heard EMK.
Is this helping to go through it this way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Or this type of, so ethyl, benzene, ethylene, ethyl. So Emily, which way? Ethyl,
I think you
methyl.
need to go up higher.
Okay. Ethyl.
There it is at the bottom.
Okay.
Ethyl, yeah, look at that. Right. Yep.
So either ethyl methyl ketone or methyl ethyl ketone. We looked there and we didn't find it, did we? Or I skipped over it. Maybe I was looking for it in one word. So MEK, class 3 material, UN 1193, it is only packing group 3. Confirm that column 3 and column 6 are there. So to answer your question, Don, I think that's the only 2 options we have. Now, you say two butanone or butanone?
Yeah, butanone or 2-butanone is another synonym for the same chemical.
As I'm scrolling through here, and one of the things I think about is reference material. Hawley's, Hawleys, Hawley's Chemical Dictionary is one that I have used for a long time back in the day when I was on the road. So that's a good resource to use. There are certain other pesticide chemicals, a farm pesticide guide. And I think when they have these entries, they eliminate numbers in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
So there are butanols, butadiene.
Scroll down just a little bit more, please.
I don't.
Doesn't look like they listed butanone.
Yeah. And, you know, since we've got so much access to Google and research, you know, that'd be worth a double check on it. don't always rely on that though. You know, this printed or this table that's available is going to be the one that's going to be the guidance that's out there. So let's look real quickly and run through some of this other stuff. Well, it's wanting to hide from me. We talked about placarding. I think we are good on that, but let's just run through and see if it points out anything real quickly. We're going to go pretty fast. We don't work with any hot stuff. Here's table 1, table 2 that we talked about. Inhalation hazard, again, compressed gases that are toxic or poisonous.
And they're table 1.
Yes. Yep. So, yeah. And I don't know that we will see a lot of that, but again, if you're working with schools and stuff, you might have that option. So those of you that work with business waste, do y'all generate a separate manifest, or you combine that with your other HHW?
We do a separate manifest.
Okay, all right. So when you do that, then, you know, that's going to be, material is going to be picked up. So you would include that in with your computation for your placarding displays.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. We're not talking about rail cars, stuff that's out there. Again, label codes. If there are multiple labels, if it's a table 1, there's a requirement for subsidiary hazards. And we know that column 6 gives us the subsidiary labels that we worked with.
Can you think of any common examples of like a generic shipping name for things that have similar or the same like hazards and subsidiary hazards?
I would say not. You know, if it's got the same subsidiary hazard, they're just going to defer to the primary hazard.
Okay.
So no, they would not have a class 3, you know, flammable liquid, and a class 3 flammable liquid is subsidiary. The primary is going to take care of the major items that we work with. Display of placards, we talked about visible from the direction it faces. Okay, Don says that you can get $10 copies of Hollies that are out there. So it's a good resource. So wherever you're looking at that, with the exception of a helicopter or a snake. So they haven't reached out there that much, or any other low item. There are specifications. This kind of goes back to your question yesterday, Don. You know, strength and durability, design, certain standards and sizes are required. I was behind a gasoline truck the other day, and his rear placard had almost faded out. And there are specs on the shades, you know, to be sure that the colors meet certain specifications. So just something to be aware of as well. One of the things used to with the placards, you know, a lot of times they would have drive safely on them, and that has been removed. If you run into any old trucks that contractor brings up to you, and if it shows you know, drive safely on it, that's no longer to be used and taken care of. So placards, like we said, can have the background that we see here, not necessarily have the wording on it. We talked about that. Colors, names, colors, numbers, hazard classes at the bottom that you work with, symbols at the top. Remember table 1 and table 2 differences that you're working with. Numbers on placards indicate that You know, you've got a bulk container in there, greater than 119 gallons. And some of those, I think some of those tote tanks go up to 1,000 gallons that are used in there. Quick run through with materials. We use pH again for acids and bases and make that determination. Probably, like we say, 4 to 11 is going to be pretty innocuous. Less than 4, we might pack that separate. Some of the things that we see that are less than 4, phosphoric acid, sodas, dark colored sodas have phosphoric acid, and it's just a little bit different. It almost meets the hazardous waste determination. It will meet the DOT hazard class as a corrosive liquid in bulk container before it's diluted. So phosphoric acid, a lot of food grade stuff. Muriatic acid, I don't know if y'all have experienced it. They do a tremendous job with promoting their muriatic acid sales, you know. And what is an indicator on a muriatic acid container that you might have problems with it?
Inhalation?
Well, inhalation, but when you look at the container, if it has blisters on it, that plastic bottle that muriatic acid is, it will blister up, and that's a pretty good indicator that you're going to have a failure of the plastic, you know, bumping it, rubbing it, running your finger through it, or something like that we work with. All right, let's look at some packaging real quickly. So, you know, it kind of throws me off. I don't necessarily think about a drum being a package, but that's what it is, and that's what DOT talks about. We've talked about them, and we want to look at this. If the container's all banged up, messed up like that, we do not want that to be used. We want it to be in good shape. Definitions 171.8, and the question about reading the 49 CFR, that is probably a good place to start as well, to understand those definitions and what they mean. To get into lingo, just like we talked about, you know, the difference between DOT, OSHA, and EPA. So any of these things here on the left can be considered packagings. As I said, the information we have on the back of the manifest would guide you and tell you what to need. This little white container here, this was a container that was manufactured by 3M. Back in the early 90s, I went up to Minnesota and worked with 3M on that to do some training with it. It is a super protective. It would handle all levels of chemicals. Inside the material is got a liner, a cushioning, and an absorbing material. If it's a liquid inside that container and it leaked, it would change the color of the container, so you know you had a leak before you opened it up. So some really neat stuff that they developed. Training, function specific. So again, 171.8, looking at the table, then looking at the table and going across and looking at the information in the column to understand and read that top column information that we see. We talked about packing group again, packing group 1, 2, and 3. This is another way of indicating the hazard of the material that we're working with. Packaging exceptions, again, for instance, 173, part 150, 172, 102 for those special provisions and the packaging requirements that are out there. Sometimes there are no exceptions for the packaging, so you don't have to worry about that. Non-bulk, we talked about the definition. Again, reading and understanding definitions are very important. Where they're using. All right, let's talk about this just a minute. So we said packing group 1, 2, and 3. So as you look on this container, we see that we've got a UN, and all hazardous materials require a UN specification container. Not necessarily a box, but something that's got a UN on it. So 4G tells me that this is a cardboard box. We are primarily looking at this section right here, this second block. An X container can handle packing group 1, packing group 2, or packing group 3. It is the most protective of that. So this box can only handle a packing group 2 or packing group 3. So if you are buying your containers yourself, or if you have somebody, a purchasing department that buys the containers for you, be sure that they are getting the containers you need. Because if you need a Y container and they have talked to a salesperson and that salesperson has talked them into getting a Z container, that will not work, because you've got a packing group 2 or 3, 2, for instance. If you got a packing group 2 material, it cannot go into a packing group Z container. So that's why it's very important to understand and look through that. So packing requirements, we see and I apologize, I was using a mouse on the wrong screen here to move around. So UN, again, specification 1A1 tells me that it's a closed head steel drum. And within these packaging marking requirements, that's where you will find all of the different codes that are given. So we talked about X, Y, and Z, packing group 1, 2, or 3. Your manufacturer, location, other information that's there. When you are filling and when you're bulking containers, you want to be sure that you allow enough ullage or outage that's there, so that if it gets heated up, it's not going to expand, particularly with your flammable liquids that you're doing the bulking with. Closure requirements, we talked about this. Here we have a single container that's being shipped out. So, it's going to talk about the container, the absorbent material, and a lot of times it talks about cushioning, both cushioning and absorbing material. Packing peanuts will not fit the requirement of absorbing materials. So if you're shipping, onesies and twosies and it requires closure, vermiculite is generally what we see that serves both as a cushioning and absorbing material. And that would be specified in the closure requirements that you're working on. So again, looking at, here's a cubic yard box. This is what you can look at and look for. Again, if your vendor is sending you junk back to be reused as a shipping container, cubic yard boxes are considered one trip, and you see here that it says non-reusable container. So if it's a hazardous material, you're going to have to use new boxes or new containers. If it's latex paint, water-based, no hazards, then they can use those over again. But sometimes different companies will try to save money and don't make them cheat you out of what you're supposed to be using. One other thing real quick, I'll mention about gases. I should have mentioned when I talked about it. We talked about the 1 pound propane bottles. If you look on them, they are a 39 NRC, put out by the American Gas Group. 39 NRC. NRC is non-reusable container. You can go to Harbor Freight and you can buy a device for $19 or $20 all day long that you can hook up to a 5-pound propane container and refill 1-pound containers, but you cannot put them in commerce. And there are, you know, they are not reusable. They're not built to the standards that are out there. We have a manufacturing plant in Tennessee that makes 5-gallon propane containers. They make 800 to 1,000 5-gallon propane containers an hour. So, and if you didn't know, there is a shortage of 5-pound propane containers. Blue Rhino is accepting those back. So I don't know if you don't have a source for getting rid of those 5-gallon containers, if you reach out to me, I'll send you the documentation from Blue Rhino. They want to have a minimum of 18, but above 18, they will take however many. They're seeing a shortage in the Northeast and the Midwest particularly. So I don't know if you have Blue Rhino in your area or not. Okay. Cylinders, we talked about them a little bit as far as being hard to identify. We just talked about them a little bit more. Limited quantities, this is what we see with cosmetics and items like that. There was something yesterday I saw about cosmetics and I can't remember what it was, but being careful and cautious. You know, nail polish is paint related material as far as disposing of stuff like that. There's some exemptions and exceptions for ag products. I don't know if any of your state ag department works with farmers to take pesticides and materials back. This is the quantity limitations. So it talks about materials of trade. It makes reference may not exceed 440 pounds. So that's one category, but I'm gonna reach out there a little bit more for you, John, and the others. Gasoline, we had a mobile event a few weeks ago, and a guy brought 50 gallons of gasoline. He had 10 5-gallon cans that he'd brought. One of the things I would encourage you on your social media and stuff where you have, you know, hurricanes and weather come through, if people buy gasoline to use for generators, encourage them, one, to use it in the lawnmower and use it and just replace it. Don't hold on to it and throw away or cycle it through their vehicle. You know, it's the same stuff that they had. After a month or two, it's still going to be good. Or you could also add some Stay-Bill or some of the other gas treatments to it and extend that life and make it go better, you know. Lab packs, the question we had, generally DOT allows those to do that. Some we talk about lab packs and some we talk about bulk pack, where there's no or minimum quantities of absorbent put in there. So a lot of that depends again on the vendor that you're working with. Here we see on the, it's not gonna give me, but that would be a specification container as well that you're working with.
Can you go back to that slide for a second?
Sure.
Or, well, were you gonna explain more in the next slide?
Okay.
What are, it says up here that they're accepted. What are they accepted from?
They are accepted in that they don't have to be an individual item, that they can be, you know,
Different or
class 3 can be lab packed, 4.2, 1, 2, 3 can be lab packed.
Okay.
Accepted. They don't have to have the individual container for each individual bottle or a container that you're working with.
Gotcha.
Different containers, you know, we're seeing a lot moving from 55-gallon metal drums to fiber drums to poly drums to cardboard boxes. And again, you know, those cardboard boxes meet the UN specification as long as the liner is there, following all the guidance that you're working with as well. So we do have some prohibited lab pack stuff. So you can't put more than one container in there, essentially what that is. So we've got a 6.1 packing group 1, 4.2 packing group 2. So generally, if stuff is contaminated, then it's going to be packing group 3 that we'll be working with. We overpack stuff if it looks like it's going to leak or if the container's not in good shape. Open head, closed head, and again, looking through and finding the material that's there for the description of the container types and abbreviations that's used. This old DOD stuff.
So just to be clear, if something can't be lab packed, each individual container of chemical has to go separately in its own
Yes.
container.
Yeah. Sometimes we run into that with, it's not coming to me, a lab grade chemicals that you're trying to get rid of might be ones. And again, that's where you reach out to your contractor and feel for that. So my friends, it looks like we are very close to the magic hour. Let's do a quick run around learning check. So Justin, what do we need to add? Good, bad, indifferent?
Pretty good all around. Yeah, at least knowing what kind of resources are out there is the main thing I got from this, and a lot of really good specific examples.
Okay, all right, and like I said, for all of you, I'm here as a resource to you. John?
Well, I couldn't even begin to tell you what I've learned. I'm an open book on this. I've learned so much. There's reasons why we follow all these rules and we need to adhere to them.
Okay, well that's great, and you know, I always like it when the light bulb comes on. I can tell the light bulb is so bright and denting it's even affecting the brightness here in Tennessee. So Don?
Yeah, again, I don't work at an HHW or apply any labels or placards, but I still think I learned a lot, mainly about the manifests, some of the different types of wastes we might come across or typically come into an HHW center. The Hollies, I may look into picking up one of those.
And you might want to try to find the most current version, you know, because
Yeah,
there are
I kind of figured it was out there for under $10 because it might be an older version.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Janet?
So I took a ton of notes. Thank you for all the information. Since we are a very small generator, just knowing what I'm looking for with the manifests from our contractor and all the resources that you provided, the whole group, and Bob, I appreciate that. But yeah, I thought it was awesome. Thank you very much.
All righty. Emily?
Thank you. I feel like I learned a lot. I feel like in particular, you helped contextualize some of the parts of the CFR. So, and put in plain language, like I'm thinking about like the placarding tables, like just hearing you go through that helped me think about them more in concrete terms and took me out of like the confusion of the language of the CFR a little bit. So I think that was really good.
And don't be afraid of the CFR.
Mm-hmm.
Dig down in there, and you know, and we joke about can't find the regulations, and I think that's what people fear a lot. You know, they see all these books and regulations, so just kind of like eating an elephant one bite at a time. So give my regards to Linda, please.
I will.
So Courtney?
I've got a lot of useful information. This is really going to help when I go into my more in-depth training this winter at the hazardous waste and start learning more about the shipping side. And I took a ton of notes, and thank you for making things clearer.
Well, again, that's everybody, isn't it? I think. So again, it's been my pleasure. to do this. I look forward to seeing y'all at future NAMA webinars or events, or hopefully at live events that engages so much more. And if, as you go to your respective chapter events or the national event, don't be bashful. You know, reach out there and get to know people, and you know, we all put our pants on the same way, one leg at a time. So we're here to support and engage and be sure that we're taking care of our family and friends. And that's ultimately why I'm concerned about hazardous material, is to be sure that, you know, I'm being safe and others are safe. So with that, I will try to get your certificates to you in the next couple of weeks. And again, if you have questions, comments, concerns, or whatever, reach out to me. Ideas that you think about that would make more sense to present this next time, let me know, and we'll go from there. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.